Hello everybody. The purpose for this particular video is to give you two sets of instructions. The first is just general, talking about what to expect over the next 2 weeks of our first, foray into e-learning. And the second is more particular. I'll be talking a little bit about the first task you have, which is for this week coming up, and it deals with the ISP literature review. Just in a general sense, I'll talk a little bit about sort of my plan for the next 2 weeks. Essentially, you're going to have a few things that you're going to have to do. For the first part of the upcoming stretch, so from the 23rd to the 27th, your primary task is what it really always was going to be. And I mentioned this in my video last week. Your goal is going to be to prepare your ISP literature review. I'll talk more about that in the second half of the video, but you will have to prepare that and you will have to submit that by Friday. And I'll just make that for both classes to keep it simple, a universal deadline for Friday. Starting on Thursday and Friday, and then continuing through next week through to Friday April, or Friday, April 3rd, we'll be transitioning into a section where I'm going to complete Unit 4.1, which was on macroeconomic sort of introduction. In particular, we'll be looking at something called the aggregate demand, aggregate supply models, which is a tool set you can use to visualize how an economy is performing. And then we will introduce an important aspect of macroeconomic policy, which is fiscal policy. Probably the simpler of the two major policy sets we're going to be looking at, the other one, of course, being monetary policy. But we'll talk a little bit about what fiscal policy is, and we'll talk a little bit about why that's important. These lessons will lead into a assessment of some kind. If we get lucky and we get back on the week of the 5th, then probably within maybe a week or so, hopefully we can get to a proper test for that section. More realistically, we're probably going to have to sort of move past tests, and so I'll have some kind of activity for you which will culminate some of the things you've been learning, and I'll have to kind of adjust. It'll probably be less theoretical than what would have originally been planned with the test. That's still sort of to be determined because I just need to know where the dates are going. I will let you know as soon as I can in about a week and a half's time what's going to sort of culminate this section of the course. Those particular lessons, I've put together a number of different videos for each day. I've done a video for every day where I've replicated the kinds of lessons we'd have in the classroom. Please try your best to actually watch them. Some of them are a little long just because the topics are kind of important, but also there's a lot to discuss, especially sort of linking to current day context. I'll post the PowerPoints if you want to look through those sort of on your own as a reference, that's fine. But I would really recommend going through the videos. I put a lot of time into preparing what I would have done in the classroom, and you're kind of cheating yourself if you're not getting that particular experience when you're at home. In addition to the lecture type material, what I will be providing to you as well will be just the usual sorts of homework. All on the first day of those lessons have a copy of textbook sections that you can reference, and I would recommend just downloading those PDFs, putting them in a folder on your computer somewhere if you don't happen to have your textbook with you, because you will need to reference that periodically. I'll also post any handouts and things that you might require. Hopefully you've got a printer where you can print some of that sort of stuff off. If you don't have it set up, you may want to try and do that as soon as you can. And then the following days, we will start as we usually would within class time, although instead of me taking up in a sort of interactive discussion, I've actually prepared, and hopefully they're okay. I've tried to make sure that they're as thorough as I can, so if I'm a little long-winded, I apologize, but I don't want it just to be sort of like, here's 3 quick answers. I want to actually really discuss things. But I've prepared answers which you can sort of use to go over the work with. And where possible, I have little whiteboards. I've actually sort of written out what you would want to do for graphs and things along those lines. We may not end up having quite as thoroughness in terms of testing of graphs, but I think at some point, if we are sort of an e-learning type situation, at least at the end of what would have been periods where there would be tests, I'll probably put something together where you're still going to have to show me that you at least understand the general schematics of what we're doing. And so practice those problems because they're going to essentially prepare you in a good way for that kind of material. So that's what you're going to be doing over the stretch to come. And I would recommend, if you want to work ahead, I'll at the beginning of each week post everything you require, so I won't make you wait day to day. I'll just post the lessons for the week, probably on Sunday evening. You can work through at your pace. You can work, at a level that's appropriate for you. Just make sure that you are sort of keeping up, because if you leave it all, it's like university, and this is an experience you're gonna. It's actually good preparation for university because it's gonna be very similar. Uh, there's nobody monitoring you anymore. You're essentially in that zone now where you do what you need to do, and if you don't do it, then you sink a little bit. If you do, then hopefully you're able to keep up. Please make sure that you do try to actually sort of, I guess, self-monitor yourself. If you can do that well, I think you're going to be in a position where next year, when that becomes the normal experience, other than a non-interactive lesson or two in a lecture hall, you're actually going to be maybe a little bit more prepared, because in a weird way, you've actually gotten some of that experience differently than traditional high school students who have that sort of nanny state type day-to-day approach within the classroom. Nanny state's maybe too cynical, but you get the idea. Okay, so that's sort of the general summation. Now I wanted to talk to you a little bit about what your primary goal will be for most of this week, which is the literature review. We spoke about the literature reviews before the break, and I spent a good amount of time in that last week or two just sort of discussing what you need to be doing. And I will reiterate that a little bit here, but really none of those expectations in terms of the instructions which you all have, in terms of sort of my suggestions, none of those things have changed. I do have a couple of points though that I do want to go over before I go over just a review of that. First and foremost, your technical work days, if you want to follow a usual sort of school schedule. For CIA 4U01, if you're just trying to remember which class that might be, that's the class that had Riley and Tristan and Aaron and people like that. Your work days are Monday, March 23rd and Tuesday, March 24th. But you can really work even now if you want to get this out of the way. Really any time up until the 27th, you can be working on this. For the class that has the other students, obviously, if it wasn't the class I just told you about, this is the second one. Your work days would have been Tuesday and Wednesday, March 24 and March 25. But again, you're untethered from the specific requirements of working day to day to day. I think you're old enough that you can kind of make your own schedule. Just make sure that you're working. To keep things simple, your assignment will be due on Friday of next week. I'm just going to make that a universal for both classes because why not? There will be a lesson in terms of our new material on that Friday, so just be prepared for that. On the weekend, you may have a little bit of small amount of work to do. But in terms of next week, so the 23rd to the 27th, you really just need to get your ISP prepared and make sure that when you submit it, you do submit a full copy, including your bibliography, and you should email that to me, okay? And as an attachment, please also, if you're attaching a file and you use the Macintosh computer, do not send a .pages file because I can't open that. That always happens every year. I would prefer, if you can, either a doc file for Microsoft Word or even more easily just a .txt, or even if you can export it that way, a PDF. My plan is essentially to gain all of the papers that you've given. I'll sneak into the school hopefully at some point that afternoon, or maybe Monday afternoon next, or in a week or so. I'll print them off, and then once I've marked them all, I'll scan them, and I'll hopefully get an opportunity to give them to you. That's going to be a nuisance getting them back to you, but we'll figure out something where hopefully it works out okay. In terms of actually working on the ISP literature review, I'll go over the instructions in 2 seconds here, just a couple of quick points. The one other thing I did want to mention, and it is something, or 2 quick points that I want to put out there. First of all, I've set up a Skype account, and if you would like to have face-to-face sort of feedback, so if you have questions and you want to ask about that, and this will carry over for your lessons as well, I'm going to give you 2 ways that you can sort of, I guess, make contact that way. First and foremost, if you want to just add me to your accounts, that's fine. My Skype is just my normal Crestwood email. So it's Jesse, Jesse, .scott@crestwood.on.ca. And if you want to just add that, if you want to have it as sort of something you can use, that's fine. It's a 100% only school account, so there's obviously nothing on becoming there. The other thing is that as far as your next step of the ISP, which will be due in May, I would plan on having one of 2 options, because I have a funny feeling this could be about a 2-month stretch. So I won't declare it quite yet, but presentations, unless we know for sure we're going back in May, just don't get started on them. Just be ready to do something. You're going to get two choices if we don't go back. The two choices are you can do a traditional research essay, but the essay will not be like the literature review. It will actually be a written out report. Your second option, and research argumentative paper, probably in the range of about 5 to 7 pages. Your second option would be if you'd like to still do a presentation of some kind, if you have the capability like I'm doing here, if you want to set things up in your house, or if you're able to make things on iMovie, if you want to make a video of a 25 sort of minute presentation on your topic, I'll have to take the part in the rubric out for class involvement. Of course, that's impossible, but otherwise, I'd actually be happy to mark it that way. And that might actually be kind of an interesting way of presenting things. You can actually, if you want, just make a video like what I'm going to endlessly be doing for the next couple of months. So that's that in terms of just how things are changing. Last point is I'll just go through instructions. You'll have to forgive me. I didn't get a 2020 version of the assignment because I didn't print that out, and it's almost impossible to get back into Crestwood, but it's pretty much the same sort of material, so I can just go through. Your literature review, this is all just review. Your literature review should be approximately 3 to 4 pages double-spaced. It should have a proper bibliography at the end, please. Okay, and it should have regular footnotes throughout, particularly when you're referencing different articles and different ideas. So make sure you're doing that. Okay, if you look at the rubric, and I do have a rubric that hasn't really changed too much here, you'll notice that for that, there are a good number of marks, 8 out of 28, that are for good bibliography and for proper formatting. So if you're not formatting, if you're not using footnotes when you reference things, direct quotations or anything like that, you will lose marks. You're old enough to know how to do that. It shouldn't really be a challenge. If it is a question, use my office hours or email. I'll help you out. But just make sure you get those easy marks, because they're easy marks that you should have. The other thing, and it's pretty well described within the instructions, which again I'll repost, is your paper should essentially do two things. First paragraph, I would just introduce the topic. So tell me a little bit about the topic and why it's important in a general sense. Just a generalized sort of introduction. The core of your paper, the next really almost 2/3 of the paper, should be you taking your issue and breaking down not your particular personal views on it, but rather telling me, in terms of the debate that you're looking at, what are some of the different perspectives that exist. And you can reference different kinds of articles or quotations from people who have sort of a stakeholder role to sort of illustrate what those views are and who holds those views. To give you an example, and again, this was one we did in class, if you look at the Canadian dollar, one of the big debates that's there is, should you have a low dollar value? Is it good if the Canadian dollar value goes down? They're talking about now actually having like a 67-cent American dollar in the weeks to come. That's scary. That's really low. But is that a good thing? Some would argue that a lower value, maybe not that low, but a lower value is actually ideal. It helps with exports. It makes it easier for companies to sort of, I guess, compete with big, large international entities. There's other reasons. You would acknowledge what those arguments are and acknowledge who makes those, and you can do a paragraph sort of on that position. The converse would also exist as an argument, in that some people don't like a low value of the dollar. They see it as something that detriments people who have to buy foreign products, or maybe as a sort of sign that Canada is cheating on developing good productivity in terms of its manufacturing sector. And in those particular situations, you may see that the low dollar value, while it might help in certain ways, it's actually seen as kind of like a negative stigma for the country. And certain people are very critical of that. You would write a paragraph essentially in your next part of the paper where you discuss, well, what are some of those arguments the other direction and who's making them and why. So tell me what the positions are. Tell me who the stakeholders are. It's not necessarily going to be binary. Sometimes you may have 2 or 3 or 4 different kinds of viewpoints. It may not be just this versus that, but give me an idea of what the kind of debate tends to entail in terms of different viewpoints. When you finish that, the end of your literature review is essentially a short paragraph or two where you preview your own personal perspectives. You're welcome to use I for that section. So if you're talking about the dollar, you can say, in general sense, I don't really think that a low dollar value is good because, give a little bit of an explanation, but don't overdo it. You're not doing a research paper here. It's really just sort of a preview and conclusion that will eventually lead into a much more argumentative either presentation, or it may end up being an essay, but a more sort of argumentative second half of your ISP. But for this, it's really just laying the ground, showing me that you have been doing a research, and showing me that you've got a good sort of understanding of your topic. So this pretty much concludes instructions for that first week. Keep your eyes open as you get towards Friday for your first lesson. If you have any questions, feel free to let me know. Otherwise, good luck, and hopefully things go well in this oddest of first weeks back after March break.